Hi, Paul here. I'm going to show you something a little bit different today. I used a slightly different method to writing this new demo for Abbey Road Orchestra Symphonic Strings. It was like a three-part process, but first of all, I'm just going to play the demo down and then I'll explain my process in starting. First things first, let's just have a quick look at the controller lanes. So you can see I'm using modulation quite a lot. Expression not so much, certainly in the first half. It's usually mainly to kind of get a much gentler entry. If I want something to really creep in from niente, then I'll add a little bit of expression to help that. And then towards the end, what I'm doing is I want to maintain in some places a more even dynamic, but then just want to shape that dynamic itself. So it becomes a little bit more of a balance between the modulation and expression towards the end. Vibrato, I'm using loads almost all the time, apart from this one section where it goes high, where it's just pretty much slammed all the way up to the top. And that's my three areas where I do most of my work in shaping the musical phrases. You'll see that here we've got very kind of deliberate use of either the very lowest velocity, so that I get that's either at the beginning of an entry, so I get a nice gentle soft entry, or if it's during a phrase, then it's so that I get that lovely portamento. And then here I'm using the kind of hardest attack, that kind of lovely marcato attack at the beginning. And then there's the occasional place where I go up here for a bowed transition. So I'm using those two areas very deliberately, but most of my kind of time is spent in the middle zone where it's just kind of fingered transition. Now, you'll see that there's a piano guide here, and you'll see that this is kind of, if I look at it, looks like it's significantly longer. I played it in at a faster tempo and then completely changed my mind about the tempo that I wanted the piece to be at. but I like the harmonic structure of what I was doing in the piano guide. So this is where this separate kind of stage comes in, because what I would often do is I'd work on my piano guide and I would get it to a point where I was happy with it, and it could still be quite rough, and then I would start orchestrating that piano guide onto the tracks below. Here I've inserted a separate stage. So I've done my piano guide, I've printed it out, and then I've started by improvising into one of the string instruments, one of the parts, and it's usually the part that carries the melody or has the most movement. And then once I've got that in, I start to look at the chords that I've got, and I take inspiration from this, but I'm essentially improvising the other parts in, and trying to create interesting movements and clashes and things like that, solely using this as a kind of guide. Now, to give you an example, let's play the first block, say here, up to bar 14 of the piano guide, and then I'll play you again the corresponding string section, and you'll see what I mean. Okay, you get the idea. It does sound a little bit painfully slow. I think I probably played it in at about 90 or something like that. So it's quite a lot slower than I played it in. But this was after I kind of sat with it for a bit and thought, this is going to work better as a slower piece. But I wanted to keep some of those chords. So I'm going to put the piano guide up on the screen for you now while I play that section on the actual strings. Okay, so you get the idea. It's following the harmonic language pretty closely, but the timing's all completely different. And I kind of wanted to, once I'd got the notes down, if you know what I mean, I wanted to just then use those as the kind of core inspiration to then improvise and feel it slightly differently, so that I wasn't kind of bound rigidly to the timings of when I hit the piano notes. There are some sections where I then decided, for example, there's this section here, which I'll play for you, where I decided that I did want to use some of these timings. So I wrote out the kind of timings that I was going to use above, and then stuck to them. So here's bar 20 from the piano. Okay, so the core idea is kind of there, but it's not. It's a little bit rough, but it gives me a kind of quite a nice framework, because I like the timing of that. So here's what I actually played in. And then the section after that, now that was, when I was playing that on the piano, I was very definitely thinking of a cello line. But as you can see, I changed it up a little bit, and I decided to get the cellos playing for that first phrase right up in the kind of, I guess it's not their highest register, but it's in a higher register than you would commonly have them, and to get that kind of really emotional, soaring, throaty sort of sound. A lot of the time, for the rest of it, I've been looking at really arrangement wise, when do the basses play, what register are they in? So for example, if you look, you can see my bass line here. So just for reference, that's the flashing C there, that's middle C. So the basses do come up there just for this section here. And then they go back down. But for the majority of the time, we'll just zoom back out, they are kind of sitting in this same register down here. I'm not using them in the bottom octave the whole time, because I want to get that light and shade. I want to feel like when they do go down, they do sit down there, you do get that sense of kind of repose. I'm not quite sure what the right way of describing it is, but if you use your basses up slightly higher, whether or not you're doubling the cellos or you've got a separate part for this, because it's a strings only, I decided that I wasn't going to do any doubling. It was just going to be 5 independent sections. But then if my basses play up here, then maybe the 2 octaves from middle C down, then in that area you've got they're just acting as part of the string section, and then when you go down to the bottom octave, it really feels like it's kind of introducing the bass end, if you know what I mean. It's a bit difficult to describe, but it does give you, if you're careful about where you use things like this, like where you use the cellos up high, where you use the basses in the bottom octave, where you put the strings, like for that section where the strings are all, if we just, let's go back to here, this section where the strings are up high here, if I just zoom into that, you can see that my top 3 parts here, when the cellos are doing their thing, they're up high. And they're in quite tight harmony. So that again is a statement. So if you choose that, you're and then you're kind of selective about where you do this stuff. It really makes a big difference, and it really kind of jacks up the emotional intensity of what you're doing, because it gives you real light and shade, and it takes you on a little journey. So I think that's, and again, like I say, the core of the ideas are in here, in this kind of first improvisation, but they're not really kind of organized. And I went off on a bit of a tangent, so round about here. I mean, I haven't used half this stuff, but the piano suddenly goes off. I mean, it's not really doing anything. I kind of, I'd kind of lost the way a little bit by that point. And I guess some of the stuff that we're using here harmonically, like that kind of thing, those sevenths, and then, you know, minor sevenths, but then these chords. And there's a couple of ways to think about that. If you want to think about that as a E major over D minor, like a polychord, or there it's more like a dominant seventh because you've got that D in the bass, or which could be in that kind of more traditional sort of harmonic sense, or if you imagine that as being stacking up the thirds here, so that's our 7th, 9th, now sharp 11 and 13. But because of the notes that we've picked, and probably whatever I ended up, you know, voicing these chords again is like, just if you change things slightly, it really dramatically changes what you're hearing. So for example, if I play this, do you see that chord has a different flavor, a different kind of meaning emotionally to the one that I've actually used? And you could even say, well, I'll invert them and do something. Let me just pick a voicing. Or, you know, there's loads and loads of ways of using these. And what I tend to do is I'll try and hear a string line. If I'm doing this kind of 3-part way of writing, I've got my harmonic structure. I'll try and hear the next string part in my head. So I'll replay the previous bit that I've put in and see what comes next within the bounds of the kind of improvisation structure here. And then that line will determine what I use in the other lines. So I'm trying to then think like, you know, an arranger, trying to give the different parts, always have something interesting for them to play at various points. So sometimes they're kind of, you know, playing chordal parts that are moving, and sometimes they're getting the kind of solo, as it were. So I hope that was interesting. It's a 3-part process to composing. So it's start off with an improvisation at the keyboard, print it out or notate it down in whatever way, you know, if you don't read music, I'd urge you to learn to read music. It's really, really useful. But if you don't read music, then just write down the chords in whatever way you feel comfortable, and then use that as a structure for beginning the next stage of your improvisation, and orchestrate your improvisation block by block. So do one section, finish that, move on to the next section, finish that, and you'll get a really interesting end result that isn't kind of tied to what you first played in. Thanks very much for watching. Look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye-bye.